do you reckon? Good angles?
Yeah, looks good.
G'day, Allegra.
G'day.
Thanks for meeting me at the Clavelli Bowling Club.
Love to be here.
We'll get straight into it. You were elected as a federal member for Wentworth back in 2022. 3 years on, how's it been? Was it what you expected? And are you feeling positive about Australia's future and the future of our planet?
Look, I actually really loved it. And so from that point of view of, I didn't think I would love it as much as I have. And I think there's been much more joy. And, I'll give you an example. Just 2 days ago, I was at St. Luke's, which is one of the sort of local hospitals. They were doing a choir for people with early stage dementia. And so I was in a room of 40 people singing their hearts out and singing songs from, probably 30, 40 years ago that all made something to them. And so one of the best things about being a politician or local member is you see different parts of your community that you think you know so well. You see all these different parts, and it's really, really inspiring. So the job itself is incredibly inspiring. In terms of Australia, I think, these aren't easy times globally, let's be honest, but there's no place you'd rather be than this country. Now, we've got our problems, we've got things we need to work on. We are making some progress on key things like climate action. We're starting to really at least start to think hard about housing and how to help our young people get ahead, some of the big issues, but we've got a long way to go. But I think we as a country, we're in the best place we could be. We've just got to take advantage of what we've got and make sure we look after what's special around here.
As an independent, is it hard? How do you get things done when you're not in one of the major parties?
Yeah, look, I think I always say there are three things you can do as an independent, and you can legislate, you can advocate, and you can vote. And so what you can do as an independent is work on how do you improve the legislation. So on climate legislation, I worked with the government in this case to strengthen climate legislation, particularly around sector by sector reporting and big some of the stuff on some of the stuff around big polluters, so how to reduce that, as well as some stuff around how to have better protections for small businesses in some of the industrial relations laws. Now that means also sometimes working across the parliament. So I've worked with the government, the Labor Party, I've worked with the coalition on other things, I've worked with the crossbench in the Senate. Jackie Lambie and I have a great relationship, which is not something necessarily I'd anticipate going to parliament, but you build relationships with lots of different people.
Yeah.
And so that's how you do it, is partly through being willing to work with people. Then in terms of advocacy, what you can do as an independent is you can speak up on what's important and really persist on that regardless of what the parties think. So things like PEP 11, which the government has finally properly ruled out, that exploration, that's because of what the community did, but also continued pressure from the crossbench on making sure that we weren't going to do that gas exploration of Sydney and Newcastle's coast. Things like I've put forward a tax reform paper, and I've done that as an independent and really provoked, I think, quite a big debate now going on about tax, which I can do with the freedom of being an independent. And then even on things like for instance, the government was going to exclude reporting on the LGBTQ community in the census. And I basically called them out and said, this is gutless. You said you were going to do it. There's no harm to anyone. It will be beneficial to the community. Stick with it. And then they backflipped and agreed to do it. So you can do things through that advocacy. And then lastly, you vote, and you can vote on what matters and do that consistently. And that also matters, because then you know that you're not just voting on whatever your party tells you, you're voting on what's important to the community.
Yeah. So they are listening, and things are actually things are a lot different.
Oh, they are. I mean, even it's just how things get done. But I mean, a lot of people don't see how things get done. We had some young women come to us in Parliament, and they were talking about how they were talking about sexual assault on uni campuses and how no one was listening. And so myself and others met almost immediately with the Education Minister, said, what are you doing about this? He then met with them and now has brought in a National Student Ombudsman to protect them.
Yeah.
But talking about students again, another big issue that got raised with me was about HECS debt, where people's HECS debts, when we have really high inflation, HECS debts was going up like 7% a year, and people were putting money in, paying off their debt, and finding themselves back beyond, they're going backwards. And so again, after sort of pressure and question time, private pressure as well as a big sort of petition, we managed the government to change that policy and make sure that HECS couldn't be indexed so high just on inflation, had to be indexed to wages or inflation.
Yeah.
So that's some of the stuff how you do make a difference.
You campaigned on a platform of climate change, economic reform, political integrity, humane treatment of refugees, and gender equality, among others.
Yeah.
So you feel like you've been able to have a positive impact in all of those areas, and do you feel like you've achieved what you set out to achieve during the first term?
Look, I haven't got every single thing I wanted. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I think that's...
What are the things where you would have liked to have been able to do more?
Look, I'd love to have done... I wish we had taken more action on the environmental laws this term. And,
Yeah.
you know, the government, you know, we've been pushing the government really hard. We've managed to get some water trigger in the environmental protection, which is really important. But we have a long way to go in terms of things like stopping native forest logging and in terms of making sure that we have in a sort of tough cop on the beaters of Environmental Protection Agency. So certainly on the environment is one area that I think we've got a lot more work to do. One of the things, you know, so for women, I think if I mentioned the student ombudsman, was a really big thing I was proud of was we've increased the level of paid parental leave. I thought it was really important as a really big impact, you know, for women. I think economic reform, look, you know, this is an area where I think we've got to do more for businesses, and I think that's probably the biggest area for me at the moment, where, you know, I'm talking to businesses and they're really struggling. So I think we've got a long way to go on that. But I think climate in general, and, you know, the National Anti-Corruption Commission is there, it's in place, it's investigating some of the robo-debt. Now, it's not perfect. I think I want to strengthen it. So I guess that's what happens is, you know, you have what you want and your community wants. You have to kind of compromise and make it work with others, and there's much more to do, and that's why I'm running again.
Can't get enough of it.
You can't get, well, I really enjoy it.
How have you gone balancing, like, you've got a family, right? Like,
Yeah.
How have you gone balancing this with your
Yeah.
family? Or
Yeah, look, it's not easy. You're in Canberra about 18 weeks a year, Monday to Thursday, so that's pretty tough. So I try, but, you know, I guess I have tried to draw quite hard lines around family time, and I've kept them completely out of it all. Like, I think, you know, so you won't see my kids on social media, you won't see my kids in this stuff.
I wouldn't even know what your husband looks like.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't Googled him though. So.
No, it's for a long while actually. When you Googled my husband, it actually came up with my sister's husband because he wasn't around.
Nice.
But it was really funny. But it's no, so yeah, it's. But, you know, you just kind of make it work. And look, a lot of people are juggling. Like, if you're a shift worker, you're juggling, you know, that. If you're a doctor, you know, you're juggling. People, you know, a lot of people have to travel for work. So, you know, I'm not the only person who's kind of got a struggle, and you have to work with your family. You work on, okay, I try and take them to school as much as I can when I'm in town. You know, I have a limit on how many nights a week I'm out when they're awake, you know, that sort of stuff. And you just try, and then I try and work really, really hard, particularly in Canberra, because, you know, no one's around, so I can just work all hours.
Just get it done,
Yeah, get it done.
I remember back in 2022, the refugees and the way that Australia is treating them was a huge issue, and we don't really hear that much about it now. Like, what have you been able to achieve there?
Look, it's actually we've come a really long way on refugees. I think, but I don't. It hasn't been that much in the public domain because I think it's so quick for refugees to be turned into, you know, political football, and so I think a lot of the good work on refugees has been slightly under the radar. So we've upped the refugee intake from 13,000 to 20,000. We have stopped effectively this indefinite detention of refugees, and probably one of the highlights of my time in Canberra in politics has been when I spoke to Saeed Amassi, who was in immigration detention for 13 years. He was our longest detainee, and actually a member of, I think he lived in Bronte, one of our local people. She came to see me, and we FaceTimed him from the office when he was in Villawood, and we were sitting in Edgecliff. And then I got to meet him 3 months later when he came out. And, you know, I advocated, as did many people, to come out, and it was amazing to meet him and to see him just want to build his life here. It was incredible. So we've actually come a really long way in terms of also a pathway to permanency for many refugees. There is still a group, what we call the fast track group, who who we don't have the right policies in place yet. So that's what I'm still focused on at the moment.
Yeah.
But we've had a really, really big step forward in terms of treatment of refugees this Parliament, and it's something I'm really, really proud of.
And if it wasn't for the independents, is there a chance that they'd just still be languishing in their cells or hotel rooms or whatever they...
I think absolutely, because it's become... I think the independents gave the government political cover to be able to deal with this, because refugees has been an area that, the coalition has really hammered Labor on in the past.
Yeah.
And having, the first debate we ever did actually in Parliament was on refugees and on putting pressure on the government to do more for refugees. So I think if you had all the Libs back in these seats and was such as tight a Parliament as it was before, it would have been much harder for the government to do it. But that's a constant pressure and a constant reminder that there are communities out here who are outraged with how we treat refugees.
Oh, it's disgraceful.
It is. And, actually, there's this wonderful community refugee partnership program. And this area in Wentworth has the biggest number of volunteers out of any of the electorates in the country. And that's because people care around here.
Yeah.
But it is that pressure, it's that advocacy. I mentioned that you can do as an independent, that you can advocate really strongly, and you can be, you can say, look, don't be, give the government a bit of courage on things like fuel efficiency and on refugees, is to say, you can do this, people are behind you, because they get battered by the coalition on this, and I think that they need to see that it's not how most people don't think like that.
And have boats suddenly started arriving, or where's...
No. I mean, we've had a couple of boats. You had a couple of boats arrive, but no, I mean, I think we've come to a point where, we don't have a sort of big refugee influx, but we are doing the right thing by them. And I think that's what Australians want. I don't think people want boats arriving. I think it's concerning from a safety point of view. And people do have, I think, a question of national security and, having our own borders. So we're not seeing this, massive increase in boats. But we are seeing, refugees having a pathway here and being able to have their lives. Immigration is a hot topic at the moment, so I think what we should be doing at the moment is having the 20,000 refugees, but the CRISP, that program I just talked to you about, where it's called Community Refugee Sponsorship Program, those numbers are on top. The government's committed that those numbers would go on top. So that's one way of doing it, of increasing refugees, but doing it in a way where the community gets involved and actually helps these refugee families settle in. And that, I think, is really beautiful. It's really meaningful for people who get involved. You build relationships across cultures, and it makes such a difference to the refugees, because they have some Australians they know straight off the bat who are there trying to help them sort through, how to get their driver's license and, find housing and all that stuff. So it's a win-win kind of program. And the government had said that they were going to put it on top, and so I think that's the opportunity, is I think to have those number of refugees from that program on top of the 20,000.
How have you found the general ethics and professionalism of the political class?
Look, I think there are lots of good people. I genuinely think there are a lot of good people trying to do the right thing in politics. What I find, but I think it's the environment and that makes people think it's okay to behave like this. And, I go to question time. I remember the first time I went to question time, and I could not believe the behaviour. And but for people in the major parties, because they see their leaders behaving like this, they think this is how you do it. And I think, I keep on looking up at the kids in the galleries, when I'm in question time, going, I don't want my kids to behave like this. And I hate to see, us as a sort of group of people in Parliament, leading kids and saying, hey, this is how you have an argument about issues that are important to the country. I think it's terrible. So I think there are some real cultural pieces. Now, I think, talking to people who've been in Parliament for a long time, I said, actually, this is better than it's been. Like, it's in terms of, like the culture has improved. There's much less of drinking after hours, some of those stuff that was really toxic, I think, last time. I think there is a bigger focus on behaviour. But
sorry, I should have asked you if you wanted to drink.
No, it's all right. Thank you.
I was getting a bit thirsty.
Yum. Thank you. So I think the crossbench, and I have set a sort of different standard and different example. And the speaker calls us Prefect's Corner because because I think we push quite hard actually in terms of parliamentary standards. I think people are good, but I think the focus on the politics rather than policy, that's what really I find very, very frustrating and very wasteful. And that's why I'm on the crossbench.
I feel like people are sick of personal attacks and the politicking. You want to just hear creative solutions to make people's lives better, basically, and you don't hear a lot of it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think people care about. That's what a woman said to me. She said, "Look, I'm not interested in politics." She said, "I want evidence-based solutions where you've consulted the experts, where you've talked to a community, you've talked to stakeholders, and you back a good idea wherever it comes from."
Yeah.
And that's my sense. It's like back any good idea, and I'll back any good idea wherever it comes from.
If you do in a second term in the coming federal election, as it hasn't been announced yet, has it? The date?
No.
It'll be April or May.
Yeah,
probably May.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
What are your plans, and how do you plan on achieving them?
Yeah, look, I think the three things on my mind at the moment are, and three sort of like buckets of stuff is one is smarter economy, because we need to. People have had a hard time last few years. Inflation has been tough. Unemployment's low, which is a good thing, but people are struggling, and I think that is about how do we help our businesses grow? How do we make the right environment for people, and particularly how do we help younger people be able to get ahead and actually sort of save for mortgages and just build a life for themselves. I think it's one of the reasons I've been focused on tax reform. The second thing is around climate and environmental action. We have in this parliament made a really big difference. Before, at 2022, the coalition was saying 26 to 28% reduction in emissions. We now expect by 2030, we're now on track for 43% reduction. So that is really good progress, but we've got more to do, and we can't go backwards. That's we can't sort of we've put real effort in. We're pointing in the right direction. We need to keep on going. And the last piece is around kind of community, because it comes back to what someone said to me really early on, is like, I want people to treat each other decently. And there's a lot of kindness in our community, within our area. People are, treat each other with, I think, a lot of care and community, but we don't see that in politics. And I think that comes up in different ways of, how do we sort of fight some of the anti-Semitism that's going on? How do we stop sort of the vilification of, people like members of the LGBTQ community? But it's also just saying, look, how do we look after people when they're having a tough time, but help people get on their feet and get going again. Yeah. And I think, a different kind of way of doing politics as well.
So in terms of the economy, the unemployment rate is still incredibly low.
No, yeah.
But I read a stat the other day that apparently, like, since COVID, 4 out of 5 jobs that have been created have been in the public sector. Is that, which then sort of makes our economy less efficient? Like, why would you go work at, for example, if someone needs a farmhand or someone to work at a restaurant, why would you do that when you can go work for the NDIS, say? Is that going to come back to bite us? Is that something that needs to be addressed?
Look, I think it's there is I think that I spent about 10, 15 years in sort of business and running businesses. And I think the truth is that the economy, how we manage to have a successful economy is due to the private sector and businesses being able to thrive. There are lots of, there has been a lot of growth in what they call the non-market economy, which includes basically the care economy. Some of that's actually private businesses, some of that's public businesses. Yeah. But that is about, supporting, older people. It is supporting childcare and the NDIS and others. I don't think it is sustainable. I think there's been a bit of a reset in terms of, investing more in our aged care homes, investing more in childcare, and investing in NDIS. But I agree with you. You've got to be growing the rest of the economy more. And I think that's, again, for me, I think the priority is like, how do we help those other businesses grow? Yeah. We've got an ageing population. We will be increasing the care economy, but we need to make sure that the rest of the economy is growing as well. Yeah.
What's the main difference between you and the Libs?
Look, so for me, it's like, I'm serious about climate action. I'm not. This isn't and protecting the environment. It's not window dressing for me, and so it's probably one of the most obvious differences. I think we need to deal with the long-term issues, and for me, one of the biggest is housing and young people, and how to help younger people be able to get ahead the way that their parents did. And I just don't think the coalition is serious about that. And I hate culture wars. I really can't stand the sort of pitching of different parts of our community against each other. And I've got to say, unfortunately, the coalition can't help themselves in those areas. But I think the main piece is that, on a bunch of issues in relation to business, probably in relation to management of the economy, I would have much more common ground with the coalition. But what happens for me as an independent, it means is I can always vote with my community. I can always stand up for this community. I don't have to be Peter Dutton's representative in Wentworth. I can be Wentworth's representative in Canberra. And I think that's what's the real difference.
You're literally a free agent. You owe no one.
I owe no one nothing. Yeah.
Speaking of which, political donations.
Yeah.
What just went down with those reforms?
Yeah. So what happened was the government brought in some reforms. Now we do need to reform our donations because Clive Palmer's just come out again saying he's out to spend another $100 million on donations. I hate that. I think it's really bad for our country. But I think. But we need to do it in a way that is both gets the big money out of politics, but also means there's a level playing field. Because I think, whatever seat you're in, you should have a contest, and that means that you should be able to have, minor parties, new parties, independents, a real mix and a real contest. And I'm afraid what's happened is that the government and the coalition have cozied up, pushed through reforms which haven't been properly, not even gone to a committee to look at, and which means that in a place like here, I have a limit on, for instance, I can only get a donation of, say, $50,000 from one person. Labor Party can get $450,000 from that one person.
Yeah.
I can spend up to $800,000, in this area. No, it's a lot of money. Yeah. But the Libs can spend $800,000 with their name, the candidate's name on the pieces of, call flutes and advertising, and then really almost unlimited amount with just vote Liberal. Yeah. So it's just, they haven't done something which is, I think, a level playing field, and that's my real problem with it.
Is banning political donations outright realistic? Why can't that happen and we have publicly funded elections?
Look, the one side is that it's a lot of publicly funded elections. There are a lot of money for... They cost money, so I think that's the question: is do you want to put your money there versus you put your money elsewhere? And I think,
sorry.
No, it's a fair challenge. And then it's also how do you make sure that the public funding doesn't just go to incumbents? Because that's what often happens now. Is they've actually increased the public funding.
Yeah.
But what happens is because the Labor Party and the coalition have long history, they get more of that money. Up front, they can almost borrow against it because they know they'll get a certain number of votes. If you're a newbie, it's much harder to access that public funding. So I think you need public funding, but you need to do it in a way that still creates a contest. It's not easy. That's why I think it needs the proper parliamentary committee and all the experts to sit there and go, this bit's good, this bit's not. Sorry, it's my fault to answer the questions too long.
We're ripping through them. We're ripping through them. So we've only been going 32 minutes, but this should be the last one.
Okay.
As at August last year, your voting record shows that you supported 56% of votes called by the coalition, 50% called by the Labor Party, 49% called by the Greens, which is fairly even. If you have to choose between putting Labor or the Libs in power as a minority government come the election, which way will you go and how will you make that decision?
Yeah. Look, I think the couple of things I'll look at is firstly the numbers, and so you're wanting stable government. I think you need stable government. I think that's really important. The second is going to be on what the parties are willing to negotiate and actually what their policies are on those three big priorities, which are sort of climate and environmental action, making a smarter economy for business and also for young people, and also sort of kinder community. So we'll see where they come out on those kind of priorities, on things like, specifically things like tax reform, and as well as making sure that we stick to 43% by 2030. And we'll see where the negotiations go. But for every single vote, I will still vote on the basis of my community. I'm never going to do one of those deals, which is basically, I'm your man now, every vote you want, count me in. I'm going to say, look, every single time I get to vote on the basis of what's the evidence, what does the community think, what do the stakeholders and experts think? And I think that's what people are looking for, because I want to be able to back a good idea wherever it comes from.